everyone, and welcome back to the AIS series Remote Control, where we continue our conversations with the creative people from the visual effects community who drive stunning visuals on screens big and small. I'm Buzz Hayes, Global Lead for Google's Entertainment Industry Solutions, and I'm Chairman of the AIS. And in this episode, we bring you the visual effects team behind the Disney Plus Marvel Studios series, Moon Knight. Premiered March 30th on Disney Plus and ran for 6 episodes. The series was created by Jeremy Slater and noted for the darker turn it takes with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It pits actor Oscar Isaac's character, a man with dissociative identity disorder, giving him multiple characters, both mortal and immortal, against Ethan Hawke's religious zealot cult leader, Arthur Harrow, in a battle for the future of Earth. As with all the Marvel Cinematic Universe worlds, the visual effects are almost as much a part of the plot as the storyline itself. This left CNN Entertainment reviewer Brian Lowry wanting to see more use of the cool look of the character, which our visual effects team can share some insights with us on today. And with that, let's introduce our guests. First up, from Weta Effects, Martin Hill. Martin is an Academy Award-nominated visual effects supervisor for his work on Prometheus and an Emmy Award winner for his work on Game of Thrones. His other credits include work on James Cameron's original Avatar and Furious 7, along with his work as a visual effects supervisor on over a dozen other titles. Welcome, Martin.
Oh, thanks very much for having us.
Also from Weta, animation supervisor Kevin Estey joins us today. Kevin started his career at PsyOp in New York as animation director for some of the world's biggest brands before taking the leap to feature films. His animation work includes an Annie Award for his work on The Hobbit and Unexpected Journey. His credits also include the rest of the Hobbit trilogy, 2 installments of The Avengers, and Zack Snyder's Justice League. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And completing our trilogy of visual effects talent, please welcome Sean Faden, a visual effects supervisor from Disney, who got his start with an engineering degree from UCLA that he applied to creating CAD design miniatures for The Fifth Element and Titanic. Sean then made the jump to the digital artist team with credits on films like Terminator Salvation, Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest, and Captain America, to name a few. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you for having us, Buzz.
So this team has brought some incredible clips showing the compositing process of some of the best visual effects sequences in Moon Knight, which we will show in just a few minutes. But first, let's hear a little bit about how you all got involved with this project. Sean, you're the production visual effects supervisor from Disney, where this story originated. So could you tell us a little bit about when and how you first got involved? And what was that process and time frame for getting this team assembled to do the work on Moon Knight?
Sure, Buzz. Yeah, I actually was on the show. I started in June of 2020, and we finished in May of 2022. So I was on us for almost 2 years. And my connection to the Marvel world, I had a lot of friends that had worked for Marvel, but my VFX producer on Mulan through Disney was Diana Giorgiuti, who had done, I think, 3 or 4 Marvel projects. And so when we finished Mulan, she said, "Sean, you got to work for Marvel. I'll tell them about you, whatever." So she had kind of laid the groundwork. And by the time I met everybody, I interviewed a few times, and got the job within, I think, after talking to a few people, and of course Victoria Alonso at the end, but it was a very long process of we were all locked down and during the pandemic, so we did a lot of initial previs and breakdowns of the script to start it off, and then we actually engaged Weta was one of the first major players to start working with us. So we started working with you guys in maybe September or August. It was pretty early.
It was around I think it was November actually, 2020 when we first had our first call.
Yeah, and that's when I first heard about it. It was November, December, and it was in January when I started getting involved as well. Martin had sort of begun his bit just before.
Yeah, which was great because they had such as we'll learn, they had so much work to do, and we didn't have a tremendous amount of time. It was not a feature film post-production schedule, so we had to make sure that we had got in early with our key design elements and effects work ideas, and to let that to start to simmer with all the talent at Weta, which was, I think, very helpful to be able to start early with them.
to that point about the getting involved early, it was almost a luxury to be able to focus on a character like Ammit for an entire year and build up and really sort of explore lots of things, because you're often not given that level of luxury of time. So that was really nice.
There was one hero shot where Ammit first is sort of unbound and she's first introduced to us, and she kind of turns and smiles at the camera. It's just really kind of creepy, amazing. It's one of my favorite shots in the whole series. But Kevin Feige saw that shot, loved it, and in watching the rest of the sequence was like, I want to see more close-ups. I want just more close-ups of Ammit. So again, the good work by Weta kind of, I think influenced the filmmakers to go with more close-ups, and of course that fell on Weta to sort of find. We had to kind of find shots that we could use to make into close-ups. Sometimes I think they had to do full CG backgrounds with their Chamber of the Gods, etc. But like that's again another case where the visual effects can actually influence the final product and the actual shot work or editing.
And speaking of animation, so did any of the animation work you were doing directly affect how they were shooting things on set? Were you having to send reference to set, or was it mostly handled as a post-production?
There was, of course, the development of, I remember we did some lens tests before you guys went to shoot, on just because these characters have, both her and Conchi, the main ones we were working with, have very long snouts, which was why angles were so important, but also lensing was something that we really wanted to know what works better. And it was very clear with a long snout that wide angle lenses are not particularly pleasing. So the other thing in terms of motion was just, and it's really hard to even make this a reality until you finally get into shot work, even when you're on stage. And we would even put contraptions like the devices you often use to put like a face camera on. We'd use that as kind of reference of like a long nose, so you don't move your head too much, because little goes a long way with those long snouts. But we'd still have to reduce things down a lot later in motion. So that was another thing I remember kind of talking about with Martin and Sean, is just trying to minimize head movement of these characters, because it's going to telegraph in such large ways later on.
So let's get into some of these great clips that you guys brought for us today, if you don't mind. I'd love to show our audience some of the stuff you've been talking about here. So our first clip shows the compositing and animation that went into a real battle scene between Moon Knight and Mr. Harrow over Cairo. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to see here.
Yeah, so the story point in this particular shot is Moon Knight gaining the upper hand again by transforming himself to get out of a situation from Moon Knight to Mr. Knight. So Harrow is essentially using Moon Knight's own cape to strangle him in the air, and you feel like the balance of power has shifted a lot towards Harrow. And then Moon Knight changes to Mr. Knight, who doesn't have a cape, to free himself from it. So the first thing we want to do with a shot like this is we take the green screen wirework plate, which has had a lot of energy to it, and also this really nice sort of orbiting camera move, and we match move that from not only the characters but the camera in stage space where it was shot. Then we have to take that match move, so both the camera and the character motion, and have that move through what is then world space. These guys are moving, and Kevin, you can correct me, but around 70 kilometers an hour, I think they were, between Giza and...
Yeah, we had to sort of, temper ourselves here and there, because often you're not seeing motion when you don't have much background. But yeah, I think it was about 70K. And the other thing, in speaking of camera and speed, is we had we always referred to the GoPro camera of like, there's a third guy here, by the way, who's filming this, and he's not on a platform, he's falling with them. So there needs to be some chaos. And so that was one of the big things that was incorporated as well from a camera perspective.
Yeah, 100%. It's not just a straight, we take our match move camera and actors and put them on a line, straight line. That has some tumble in amongst it, very much like we were referencing a lot of sort of free fall parachute people. Not it's quite the same thing, but it has that similar sort of vibe to it. So even if the stage space is shot with sort of like quite a smooth orbit, we can add some tumble to that as they fall, which kind of helps some of the dynamism to it.
Yeah. Also notice that that Weta adjusted the animation of Moon Knight to look like he was struggling more, because the point of this is supposed to be that he's being strangled by his own cape by Harrow, and so our stunt performance was great, but we didn't quite have that struggle on the neck that we wanted, and so they reanimated that whole thing, put a whole new full CG Moon Knight head and performance on there, and got that feeling of tension against the neck that gets released when it switches to Mr. Knight.
Yeah, from an animation perspective, when you get into something like this, it sort of has so many of those elements that you can't really compromise your approach to it. The heavy contact between two characters, the very visual gripping of cloth, not only on the front side but also a cape that is, a story point being gripped by one character that's in between, sandwiched between two characters. Like, all of those elements add up to a lot of, you can't use your usual tricks. You got to just get in there and make it as legitimate as possible. So it just takes a lot of time, a lot of back and forth. And it was good to sort of have that process with Sean and Martin to kind of, fine tune those elements to get it just right. Because this was one of the ones where I remember when we'd seen the previews come in, I'm like, that's going to be quite a shot. It's quick, but it's got everything in it.
So next we have some sequences of the work you did creating some very dramatic scenes and effects within a detailed Cairo marketplace. Could you tell us a little bit about the challenges of creating this very detailed set and how you set it up to stage these scenes?
Yeah, so we can see in the first clip where we're looking down the street, there's actually only a small area of extension that we needed to do, but it really helps sort of sell the scale. But we did need to build a sort of CG version of the set that was there on location to be able to interact with any kind of destruction or also lighting effects from Harrow's staff. So whenever we're doing sort of like a new magic effects, you want to find something sort of interesting and unique about it. And in the Marvel universe, there's quite a lot of different looks out there. And even while we were working, some concurrent productions were doing some similar things, and we had to adjust to make it not so much like Miss Marvel's effect. Actually, one of the things we thought was really important was just to ground the effects in the scene. So it's not just a light spark between Harrow and Moon Knight, is to make sure that it's always not only just illuminating the set, but also interacting with it. And we did that in a number of ways. One of them was, with our sort of 3D effects, having them fill the volume and crash into the side. And then we had some 2D manipulation, sort of light optical effects that affected the plate or the CG plate placement, with some really fine electrical little tweaks on top, which just added an extra sort of chef's kiss of detail on there. The second shot is a little further on in the fight, where Harrow again is getting the upper hand on Moon Knight, and sort of captures him and actually grabs his wrist where he's holding the crescent, where he's about to attack Harrow. And we really wanted to make that clear that it was a manacle that was sort of holding him in place, and then he could sort of pull Moon Knight's arm around and actually throw the crescent sort of vicariously, that then pins Scarlet Scarab to the van. And that was with these really quick shots. One of the main things was just to make that as clear as we could. So the arc of the chain of the manacles is actually going round the back of his arm there, so we can see the hand, you can see the crescent. We're still getting a bright manacle around the wrist.
I would just add a couple of things. One is that Stefania's set, which was massive and awesome, and I'm glad you guys were able. I'm seeing this some of these layers of effects, and as a former effects artist, like, I'm blown away, because I don't always get to see all the individual layers, because if you show the individual layers to the VFX supervisor, a lot of times they start picking it apart, and then you end up with too many iterations. So I'm just happy that it looks so great, but it's pretty exciting to see how much work went into it, and that volumetric layer that you're talking about, I think, is outstanding. It's awesome. But the building that these guys were able to, scanning and getting all that details from the set allowed them to sort of extend the buildings with not only the buildings that we, like I said before, we sort of stole from Budapest, but also just anything else that they added throughout their city. We're able to kind of sample some of these signage and details and all little sort of really nice things that were actually, we had an additional Egyptian on set kind of a set deck team that had actually, that knew a lot about a lot of those details, and were able to kind of really get it there. But the last thing I would say is that the buildings, we had, a lot of shots that kind of looked in lots of different directions, but I can remember working with Weta, we'd have one shot to be like, oh, that's it. That's the perfect sort of balance of like lights on in the windows and whatever. And I probably drove Martin crazy, because I'd be like, okay, I'd see a shot and go, just make it look like the windows that I saw in, I can't remember the shot names anymore, but that I pick a shot, like I want it to look like 1805 or whatever it is. And that's what we end up with, a really nice consistent thing. And just having some of these little fine dots of points of light in the distance that you see in this shot, it really just sort of adds scale and depth to these moments.
It was really interesting with the lights and keeping with the modern, vibrant Cairo. It was a case of, well, we built some minarets and sort of towers on mosques, which we could put back there, and some of those had some lights on. But we should put some more modern sort of radio masts and things as well to make sure we kept with the aesthetic. And as Sean was saying, it was really about, the city isn't just the marketplace. We wanted to make sure that there was light and life in those lights back there, and make sure that as they receded, they had all the atmospheric sort of heat haze of latitude 30 city. It's quite.
And notice the variation in color temperature of the lights, because as we would joke about, they don't all go to the same hardware store and buy the same light bulb, which is that's your first version of an asset might have a very consistent kind of light color, and we tweaked, and then we have a nice variation in terms of intensity and temperature.
It's amazing work. These sequences are incredible. And finally, we have a few clips of the Million Night Sky scenes. I understand that you actually used real NASA data to create an accurate galaxy with recognizable stars and constellations. Can you tell us a little bit about what went into these sequences?
So the story point here is Mark and Layla, or Stephen and Layla, found a map which uses the constellations and stars to find the dig site in the desert. But it was created, 4,000 years ago when the pyramids were built. So the stars are all misaligned. So they have to roll back time in the skies, in the heavens, to kind of get the stars back to where they were. So one of the lovely things about this sequence, which I really appreciate on the show, was we were involved very early on, sort of at the previous stage before shooting. And that meant, in terms of the progression of the shots, we could map those out and sort of accurately look at, okay, well, what is the energy of each shot is going to be? What's the tempo of it? Because it's going to affect the on-set lighting and how we light Oscar and May on set. We wanted to sort of look at, well, what can we use as inspiration from reality? What happens if we actually tried this and rolled back time and, put our camera in Cairo at, latitude 30, face south? What happens? And so we took an astrophotography app, the kind used for sort of telescope sort of star tracking, that had time functionality, and sort of rolled that back and kind of looked at sort of various things. And it's like, there's lots of interesting stuff going on. So we replicated that in Nuke. So we created basically, the galaxy and the Earth Moon orbits, to a pretty high fidelity, just to see what would happen really. And from that, we took the stars, and we actually took all the proper 3D positions of all the stars. So we used the NASA Gaia 2 data set. It has about 8 million stars in, and so we lined it all up, spin the world backward, and it came up with some really interesting motion.
In that regard, this sequence was one of the first ones that I got involved in early on in the project, before they were going into production on it. And it was great to set the tone with a sequence like this, because there was a lot more back and forth than we usually do in terms of the work that Martin was doing on the skies. not only because it was going to help dictate what was going to happen in motion, since the character and the sky are interacting essentially, but also in terms of the feedback loop of just ideas. It was really just a bit more of a sandbox in the sky, as it were, of us to kind of shout out different thoughts on what it might look like, what it might feel like. And so I realized very early on that it's going to be that kind of a project. It's going to be very collaborative, very open, very sharing in ideas, and even going to the production side with Sean when they went to set, using the skies that Martin had created to help dictate the lighting there, because it would also be interacting with the live action characters as well. So it was a great sort of loop of sharing and creativity and collaboration. And so it was great to sort of kick things off with that.
A lot of the shots that we're seeing now is about the moon spinning around from, you know, a few hours a frame to days a frame. And that gives us sort of multiple streaks of the moon going past. You notice that we're not putting the sun in this, otherwise the whole thing would be a strobing mess. The only time we see the sun is illuminating the moon. What we're also seeing is we created a lot of the animations of the sky before shooting. And what that meant was we could take a slice out of the sky and pass that to the on-set team, DOP, who could use that as inspiration for what they were doing for the lighting panels and the pace of the lighting panels. And then as a bit of a round trip, we had witness cameras pointing at all those panel lighting on set, which we could extract the animated lighting back on, so we could relight Conchu in line with how Mark was lit on set. So it was a nice sort of loop there. I think one of the really interesting things, though, happened in the sequence when, after we go through the really glitchy multiple years stuff, is when we start to see the stars actually move and the constellations form, which is the real sort of story point of the sequence. And for me, that was one of the interesting things, was by using kind of the correct data from NASA and essentially orbiting all the solar systems around the galactic center in terms of, you know, many years of frame. You got all this lovely parallax motion that just kind of worked out of the box. I remember, Kevin, the first time we saw that, we were like, oh yeah, that looks really has a lot of depth and space.
Well, there was that early discussion when you were kind of getting more into the development of things starting to line up, that we knew that stars don't really have a whole lot of depth in terms of like parallax, but adding that parallax into it is what really gave it that extra bit of life, even though it was a bit of a cheat of sorts. And that was kind of a cool moment to see that development, where it's like, we are going as real and legitimate as possible, but there is that room for artistry and creativity to make something that just looks cooler. And I remember that conversation in particular. We were just saying, at the end of the day, we want to just make something that looks cool. If it's scientifically accurate, but it doesn't look as cool as something that's a little bit off, then let's err more on the side of looking cool.
Yeah. Having that inspiration there was great, because as you say, we did deviate quite a lot. And one of the biggest cheats that we did was, really the pyramids were built sort of 4,000 years ago. If you roll back 4,000 years, the stars barely move. So across the sequence, we worked out, we actually moved back in time over 20 million years.
Well, you and your teams did an amazing job bringing this new story to life in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Thank you so much, Sean, Martin, and Kevin, for sharing with us today. And we look forward to continuing to see your work across all of the Marvel Universe platforms and in the movie theaters. So thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Buzz. Thank you, everybody.
That's it for this episode of Remote Control. Be sure to like this episode, share your comments, and subscribe to the AIS channel. Again, we want to thank Gary Radburn and Matt Allard at Dell, Rick Champagne at NVIDIA, the NAB Show, Computer Graphics World, Michael Mansouri and Meatmo for their Meatmo production platform. And of course, a very special thanks to Disney, Marvel Studios, and Weta Effects for sharing their talented visual effects team and their amazing work with us today. Thank you for watching this episode of AIS Remote Control, brought to you by Dell. We'll see you next time.